Okay, I guess I have to say this into the microphone for people on Zoom. So we're still waiting for a few more of the panelists to arrive. And so when we're ready to go, we will begin. Thank you. The shelter providers that as good as we're going to be for a while. Thank you, everyone. A quorum of the Human Services and Veterans Committee being present, I call today's meeting to order. The call of today's meeting is to hold a public hearing to discuss issues facing homeless shelters in Cambridge and concerns raised by the unhoused community. The first order of business is a roll call of committee members who are present.
Vice Mayor McGovern.
Present.
Councillor Nolan is absent. Councillor Siddiqui.
Present.
Present. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler.
Present.
Present. Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Present. That's 4 members present and 1 recorded as absent.
Thank you. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, adopted by the Massachusetts General Court and approved by the Governor, the city is authorized to use remote participation at meetings of the Cambridge City Council and its committees. Please note that the City of Cambridge audio and video records this meeting and makes it available to the public for future viewing. In addition, third parties may also be audio and video recording this meeting. In addition to having members of the council participate remotely, we also set up Zoom teleconference for public comment. Please be aware that Zoom is being used for public comment. We will allow each speaker 3 minutes. There will be no additional public comment sign up after 12 p.m. To watch the meeting, please tune into Channel 22 or visit the open meeting portal on the city's website. If you would like to provide public comment, please visit the City Council section of the city's webpage. Instructions for how to sign up to speak are posted there. Once you have completed the sign-up procedure, you will receive a link to the Zoom meeting. With that, all of today's votes will be by roll call. If you're in the audience and you wish to speak on public comment and you have not signed up yet, you can do that from here out. Right, and just so folks know, just before you do that, I'd like to just quickly move suspension of the rules to make a motion to suspend City Council Rule 37.8. For folks who, 37.8 is the council rule that asks speakers to give their name and address. I know that there are some folks who are uncomfortable doing that, so we're going to waive that rule so that you do not have to give your name and address. It is important, even if you don't use the exact name, so that in the record we can say, Joe said this, even if Joe is not your first name. It's just for keep track of the record. But if you don't wish to give your name, your real name, you don't have to if we suspend this rule. So I move suspension of Rule 37.8. Roll call.
Vice Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
Councillor Nolan is absent. Councillor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Councillor Sabrina Wheeler. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes.
It's 4 members voting yes.
Okay, great. So that rule is suspended. So please feel free to sign up. Thank you all very much for being here. I appreciate your time. We appreciate your time. I want to quickly, I am Vice Mayor Mark McGovern and the co-chair of the Human Services and Veterans Committee. I'd like to introduce my fellow co-chair, City Councilor Aisha Wilson, who's with us today. I will be chairing today's meeting. For folks in attendance who don't know us, we're both social workers. So we both have both a professional, political professional, as well as social worker professional experience working with folks who are, facing all kinds of challenges, including folks who are unhoused. And we also have experience, obviously, working with various providers around the city and around the state. So we're coming to this as with both the lens as fellow social workers as well as elected officials. In terms of the goals for today's meeting, we called this meeting after a policy order was filed and passed by the City Council, asking us to convene a meeting to talk about particularly about the overnight shelters in Cambridge, and to talk about how they're run, who they serve, how to give a voice to some of the guests at those shelters who have come to both the mayor's office and our offices with concerns about some of their experiences in these shelters and wanting to give them a voice to air those concerns. and to talk about what are the procedures at the shelters if there's a complaint or if there's an issue, and how do those things get resolved. We know that this is a very that it's a very complicated work. We do want to say that we really appreciate the folks who do this work. As fellow social workers, we know you're not in it for the money. You're in it because you care. We also know that there are a lot of challenges faced by folks who are unhoused in our community, and despite whether someone is housed or not housed, that it's important that any services provided in this city, whether they be provided by the city themselves or provided by nonprofits or providers in the city, that we make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure people are treated with respect and dignity. And so we wanted to call this meeting. We're hoping that this is a productive meeting. We want people to be able to speak freely about their experience, but we also want to make sure that we're being productive and we're working towards a goal of improving conditions for people in the city and doing all that we can as a city to support our providers to make sure that they can do their jobs well. So the way the agenda will work today, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're joined today by Bay Cove, who will talk about their programs in the city. Green Street, First Church, Salvation Army. Is Phillips Works House here yet? Do we know? Hope they will be joining us at some point to talk about the Harvard Square Homeless Shelter and Y2Y. We have the Department of Human Services here from the city. We also have online Charity Reader, who is from On the Rise, and Cassie Hurd from MAPS, who will be talking about, they've been talking to unhoused folks in the community over the past couple of weeks about this meeting and getting some stories and concerns that those folks may not necessarily be comfortable testifying to themselves today. So they're going to be part of the panel virtually to talk about those experiences as well. In terms of the order of business, we're going to start with the Department of Human Services, who's just going to talk briefly about the city's role in all this. It's the city itself does not operate shelters. Probably the closest thing we have is the Wellness Center and the Warming Center, which were sort of started by the city, but the city doesn't run them. Bay Cove runs them, so the city doesn't have employees that actually run shelters. They're all run by nonprofits, but we do support those organizations contractually. So I wanted the Department of Human Services to talk about what that relationship is and what oversight we do have and what oversight we don't have, so that people understand, the process. We'll then go to Bay Cove, First Green Street, First Church, Salvation Army, and then we'll see if the Phillips Brooks House is here at that time. If the providers could just initially, just who you are, what shelters you run, who you serve, and just sort of keep it that brief initially. We'll then go to public comment so that we can hear some of the concerns. We're not going to address specific concerns today. There's not going to be a back and forth between public comment. So if you come up and say, hey, I'm having this concern at such and such a place, the panelists aren't going to engage in a conversation with you, a back and forth with you about that. This is to hear overall what your concerns are and your personal concerns, what your experiences are, but we're not going to resolve them in the public meeting today. And so the way public comment works is people get their 3 minutes, they state their case, but there is not a back and forth, okay? So people understand that. And then we will have discussion by the committee. We're also joined, in addition to the committee members who you heard at roll call, we're joined by City Councilor Kathy Zuzzi, who is not on the committee but is here because she is interested in this topic. Jim, you have a question? You have to speak right into the mic and turn it on because of the Zoom.
Sorry about that. Maybe it's not possible, but I was wondering if it might make sense after the city does its presentation, maybe let folks from the community speak, because there seems to be a significant number of people here who would like to be heard, and then rather than make everybody wait, till we go around the table. And but that may not be
protocol. Thank you for that. I mean, the only thing that I want to do is the providers are not making presentations right now. They're just going to say who they are and what programs they run. That should probably take 5 minutes. And I want people to know that so that before they speak, they know who is in the room. There are people here that may not be members of the unhoused community that are interested in this topic. I want them to know who's at the table. So again, these aren't going to be a long, I assume we're going to get to public comment within 5 or 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Assistant City Manager Ellen Seminoff from the Department of Human Services Programs.
Thank you so much. Let me just say first, let me identify who's here with me today, who are the people who do all of the work I'm briefly going to describe. Liz Mengers, who heads up our planning development group, and I think her staff person, Joel Estes, is here along with her. Maria Mello, who many of you know, who heads up the Multi-Service Center, and she's here with her staff person, Hannah Daniels, and I think that might be the only. And so the city has, I would say, 3 roles here. One role is our direct service role through the Multi-Service Center, and we provide services, which many of you know, which are prevention-oriented, but we also have a homeless services case manager. We do oversee the assessments for people who are looking to leave shelter or leave being on the street to get into housing somewhere in the city or outside the city. And I would say that we also, through the Multi-Service Center and through our planning development group, also assist individuals relevant to the conversation today who come to us with concerns about their experiences with a particular shelter and are often in communication with the shelter about what we're learning from people who are coming in. With respect to our planning and development operation also results in our being a funder in one way or another of, I think, every shelter that's here. Some of them we are their primary funder, like the Salvation Army, as many of you know, when it lost its state funding, the city became the primary funder of the Salvation Army. For others of the shelter programs that are here, we are the major funder of the Warming Center, the major funding of the Wellness Center, and we provide supplemental funding to, as I look at it, with the exception of Green Street, where we are not a funder, that is funded solely by the state. We provide funding of some form to every other shelter that's here. And what I would also say is we also, our staff, coordinate what was during the pandemic a weekly meeting of all the shelter providers to try to help ensure that we could provide support together with the public health department to the shelters which were understandably deeply struggling during COVID in ensuring safe environment for all of our shelter guests. In addition to that, we convene several different groups to support the shelter providers as well as to oversee the major funding that comes to the city, which is over $6 million a year, which is for primarily permanent supported housing for people leaving shelters or leaving the street, but it also provides some level of supportive services to ensure that individuals are able to stay housed and find housing. And I think, as lots of people know, through the use of first a variety of different federal streams during COVID, continuing with the city's federal ARPA funding, we have been a major source of support for housing navigation, stabilization, and showers program that's operated in collaboration with First Church and the University Lutheran Church. With that, I'm going to turn it back over.
Great, thank you. So again, now we'll go to Bay Cove. If you could just introduce yourselves and who's here with you, and just quickly the programs that you provide.
Absolutely. Hi, my name's Holly. Okay. My name's Holly Boginski. I am the Senior Director of Housing Homeless Services for Bay Cove Human Services. With me is Maureen Cunningham, who is the Director of our Cambridge-based shelter services, and Alexis Granberg, who is the Director of our First Step outreach team.
I know sometimes social workers are mellow and soft-spoken, but you got to really speak into the
I got to
mics,
use my
otherwise they can't pick it up.
outside voice. Okay.
Use your outside voice.
So Bay Cove Human Services, also CASPAR Services, has a long history of providing shelter services in both Cambridge and Boston. We run a 50-bed shelter for women in Weymouth, a 50-bed drop-in night center in Boston, as well as a day shelter in Boston. Specific to Cambridge, we run the Caspar Emergency Shelter located at 240 Albany Street, which is a 60-bed co-ed shelter. The Transitional Wellness Center, also located, co-located in the Spalding in Cambridge, which is a 56 co-ed shelter. And we run a seasonal winter warming center, which is Cambridge Warming Center, which provides nightly drop-in capacity to 40 individuals from December 1st through April 30th.
Thank you. Green Street, you're online. I'm not sure if you can just introduce yourself and who's with you today, please.
Councilor McGovern, we may need to promote. Do you know who it is from Green Street?
I thought Ellen had given names.
The names that were given, I do not see on the Zoom.
We'll skip Green Street for now. Jim from Stewart First Church, if you could just...
Yeah, Jim Stewart, First Church Shelter. We have run a 14-bed overnight shelter in the basement of our church for the last almost 37 years. During the pandemic, we entered into a partnership with the city to do meal distribution and to open community showers. We did that in partnership with the city and then later on with University Lutheran. We also partnered with the city in providing housing navigation. And although I don't speak for Friday Cafe, it's a separate program. Friday Cafe is the important provider of services to the unhoused and poor community in the city as well.
Thank you. Karen, Salvation Army?
I'm Karen Meehan, Director of Salvation Army in Cambridge. We run an overnight shelter of 35 beds. We run a day center during the day, a drop-in center. We offer showers, we offer food. The numbers are rising, and on behalf of the guests that I serve, we thank the city for funding us.
Thank you. And Green Street is online, so Green Street, if you could introduce yourselves, please, and just talk about your program.
Hi, this is Mr. James, Assistant Director.
And can you just, how many beds do you have, and who do you serve?
So we have funding for a 50-bed only. Our total cap is 66. We have 33 women and 30 men. So it's a men's and women's shelter, 2 different buildings adjacent to each other.
Great, thank you. Anyone from Phillips Brooks House arrive, either online or in person? Okay. All right, great. So now we know who's at the table, right? So we're going to go to public comment. As stated before, you do not have to give your name at public comment. Since we waived that rule, you have 3 minutes to speak about this particular topic, which is our shelters, conditions in our shelters, your experience in our shelters, what you think you can speak about what you think is going well, what you think is not going so well, and what if you would like the city to do. If you're here to speak about anything other than shelter providers, that is not the topic of today's meeting, and you won't be able to speak to that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to call the public speaker.
The first speaker is Lauren Verdant.
And just when you come up to the mic, you have to press the button to make sure the green light is on.
I just want to make sure, is anyone here from VA?
No.
Is Ryan McCluskey here? Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Lauren Green, and I was a client at almost every co-ed shelter except Green Street. So these are my suggestions on how to improve the quality of life and human rights in Cambridge shelter system. Grant the shelter clients who have or attain ServSafe certification at least 15 minutes a shift to prepare their own food in the kitchens. And the shelters currently claim that the city has a rule against client access to the kitchen, and sanitation certification would solve that problem and build workforce development. Each shelter seems to have a Neuralink science program, and there is food drugging coordinated to that. There could be a new policy to stop unethical Neuralink profiling. It's an educator's nightmare. All shelters could be dry and have smoking cessation policies on their peripheral grounds, optimal usage of green space for urban gardening and composting and recycling. At least 5 clients per shelter could serve on an advisory board and be integrated in a regular staff meeting to ensure transparency. They could be granted microjobs of sanitation or food prep for modest wage and societal reintegration. Clients should have freedom of movement to jog at 5 a.m. and still be able to return for a shower before they exit at 8 a.m. And then personally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, that the Harvard Square Homeless Shelter in July, Director Christina had said that she had not agreed to any of these things in our last summer meeting, and she was not in agreement to inclusiveness in their board meetings. And she admitted to drugging my food on July 6th to me with a military abortive drug which caused severe hemorrhaging, and I almost bled to death. And after this happened, the day after I had reported rape in Washington, D.C. against CIA agent George Murphy, and it was direct retaliation. And I'd appreciate an investigation into Christina to her absolute fire from the program, and because I'm pro-life, and I want the CIA director prosecuted for coordinating the rape and the military involuntary abortive drugging that has been occurring in multiple states against me. And I was also in England falsely accused of making a bomb threat and have tried to leave the country because I've never been able to get jurisprudence against this issue after I came back to the United States, and the military, the VA has been using this to justify stealing from you.
Our next speaker.
That's your 3 minutes. You can send us your comments via email. I will say this too, one of the rules that we have here in terms of public comment, if we can, you're speaking directly to the chair, and if you can try to, I know that you probably have stories of individuals who work at these programs who you've had a conflict with. If we can try to speak more generally and not name specific individuals, that would be helpful to people who are not here to defend themselves or to speak on their behalf. We like to keep this some degree of order. So if you're having an issue with a particular shelter, you could talk about that particular shelter because their representatives are here, but please do not try to name individual staff members. So that's your time. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Jeremy Dalpy.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Dalpy. I'm currently at HSHS, and I couldn't be happier being in a place that's managed and run by student volunteers and not corrupt, abusive Bay Cove staff. The difference is night and day. Case managers, a solid meal program has been essential to making progress towards a self-sufficient life again. My previous stay at the Warming Center across the street here, from December 2023 to May of 24, halfway through my stay, someone walked out with all of my valuables, including laptop, GoPro cameras, storage devices, while the staff were sleeping. Bay Cove Human Services bid on and won that city contract, then installed corrupt, abusive staff who laughed at me and my loss. They never addressed the lax security that led to my loss and showed zero interest in making it right. Homeless individuals deserve safe and healthy living conditions, dignity, and respect. There must be accountability for everything Bay Cove staff allowed to happen, and replacing the stolen items is important to me. Avoiding a civil suit would be nice. It was all I had left, but to this day, they ignore my emails. If their senior program director, Maureen Cunningham, installed decent staff, I'd still have my belongings. They set me back thousands of dollars. Thank you.
The next speaker is Dan Totten.
Hi, my name is Dan Totten. For 7 years, I worked for Councillor Zondervan, and I did direct work with unhoused members of our community. And I just want to share a couple of stories. Number one is when we had the War Memorial Shelter, there was a client who alleged that she was called the N-word by a staffer, by a Bay Cove staffer. She had a meeting with Maureen, and then a few days later, she was magically given a voucher and whisked away to an apartment in Boston, and we never heard from her again. I contacted her to get permission to share with all of you her story, which is in your inbox, so read it after this meeting, please. Another example, at the Albany Street Shelter, somebody was sectioned, and when they returned to the shelter, all their belongings were gone. They had been thrown away. This is something that the shelter admitted to. And the next thing you know, I get a call from him. He's standing on the roof of the Green Street Garage, about to jump. The third example I want to give you is someone more recently at the shelter who was called a homophobic slur and spent a year on the street because he didn't want to go back. The truth is that, everybody sitting at this table is going to talk about how awesome things are and how much we fund and how we do this and that. They're using you guys. I want to be really clear about that because I have been in this room for 7 years and I have watched.
Dan, you direct to me.
I don't think you want me to direct this at you. Y'all are using them because I've sat here year after year after year and the same people sit at the table and we hear from Ellen about how awesome things are and how much the city spends money. And nothing changes. Nothing changes, and nothing will change after today. So you all will have to relive your trauma. You all will come up here. You will stand up here, and you will speak, and you will relive your trauma, and you will share your stories, and you will open yourself up, and you will make yourself vulnerable. And then nothing will happen, because the city's not willing to fund more vouchers to get people out of the shelters. The shelters are not supposed to be an end game. The shelters are supposed to be a place where people go when they have nowhere else to go. And we're supposed to get them into real housing, right? But that's not how we look at things. We pat ourselves on the back just for doing the shelters, right? The truth is, the voucher conversation, no one's talking about more vouchers for homeless people. When we talk about Albany Street, nobody talks about how that place needs a gut renovation. That place needs to be renovated from the ground up, and we need to put permanent supportive housing on the upper floors. And it's allowed under the AHO. Nobody's willing to provide the funding that needs to happen to improve this. We don't talk about how our staff trained. Our staff trained in dealing with people with mental health conditions. Our staff trained in de-escalating. We don't even know how they're trained. I don't know how they're trained. And lastly, we don't even know if the staff at Albany Street are being paid a living wage. Because when that policy order was submitted a couple years ago, we never heard back from the city confirming. And I still believe that I would love that to be addressed today. I see people nodding. I would love that to be addressed today. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Cynthia Doucette.
Cynthia Doucette has not joined the Zoom. We will go to Charity Ryder. Charity, you can unmute yourself. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Charity Ryder. I'm the Director of Clinical Services at On the Rise in Cambridge. On the Rise is a daytime drop-in shelter that works with women, trans, and non-binary folks. And I've worked at On the Rise for a little over 20 years and have worked closely with lots of folks that are in that room and appreciate all of the work that you're doing. I'm here to just voice some concerns from some of our participants who have accessed the shelters here in Cambridge. I think the overarching theme that I've heard from the people that I've spoken to is just that there's kind of a lack of consistency with rules being enforced. And kind of the overarching thing, I think, for me is just operating in a trauma-informed way. So being really clear about expectations, being clear about consequences, having things very like rules accessible to people and written down. I think some of the folks I've talked to have felt like they've not been able to get those things in the shelters in Cambridge and have felt like sometimes the rules are enforced differently for different people. And so really just wanting things to be a little more clear and consistent, I think. And I think I've definitely heard some comments from people that they have felt disrespected by staff, which I heard in some of the previous speakers. And so really just hoping that there could be just more consistency, more predictability, and more respect shown for the folks who are using the shelters. I think specific to Green Street, I think it's been very hard for us to refer folks to Green Street. It's been very unclear since maybe a little bit like later in the pandemic, what the process was to refer people or what the right number was to call. And so I feel like a lot of our folks are no longer staying at Green Street because of that. Maybe that's one of the reasons. I'm not sure if there are others, but I do feel like it's been very challenging for us at On the Rise to be able to get our folks access to the Green Street shelter. And certainly folks who have stayed there have definitely been people who have had very positive experiences and people who have experienced some similar things around feeling like things were inconsistent and potentially not always respectful. But I think that's it. Just again, in closing, I really feel like the themes that I heard were just that people were asking for more respect, more consistency, and more care when staying at the shelters in Cambridge. Thank you.
Thank you. And Charity, you're a panelist, so you can stay on. So when we get to the discussion phase, if you have anything you want to chime in, you'll have the opportunity to do that. Next
Great,
speaker.
thanks.
Next speaker, please.
We'll go back to skip speaker Cynthia Doucette.
And for the record, we're joined by Y2Y.
Cynthia, please.
Hi, can
Harbor
you hear me?
Square Homeless Shelter are here.
Yes, Cynthia, please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Sorry, I was having internet problems at the wrong time, so I apologize. So I am actually not, I don't live in Cambridge, but my husband has been at Spalding Rehab for 11 months. So I'm here to talk about the Transition Wellness Center. So I've met a lot of people. Obviously, I've been there for 11 months, and I see a lot of the people coming in and out of that shelter. And I've heard a lot of stories that brought me here today because I'd like to share those stories. I don't walk in their shoes. I don't really know about the homeless situation until recently. And I wanted to bring some of these stories over to you. I hear that at that center, the staff is very unkind. They're abusive to the people that are in there. And these are human beings, regardless of their situations. They're human beings, just like myself. And I hear that they've been told at some point to leave the facility in the middle of the night in the winter for 3 hours to take a walk because they did something wrong, which is like leave a window open. And to me, they're not children. Where do you expect a person who's homeless to go in the winter, dead of winter in the middle of the night for 3 hours? It was mind-boggling, some of the stories. Another story is some older gentleman took a little extra food and he was asked to leave in the middle of the night for a couple of hours. There's fighting. People are losing their valuables, which some people barely have valuables, and what they have, they can't replace. And the centers aren't helping them. So that's why I came today. I took this time out of my work schedule. My husband, who's seriously injured and has been in the hospital for 11 months, but I felt like I've heard these stories. These people opened up to me. And I felt like I had to come here today. And another concern is that they've been told that they can't be out on the street, a public street in Cambridge, smoking, that they have to go miles away. And some of these people are in wheelchairs. Some of them are amputees. Like, where do you expect them to go? It's a public street. I can smoke on it. Why can't they? So those are some of the stories. I don't want to get into all of them. We have 3 minutes, but I came here to represent these people who are human beings. And quite frankly, if they were in prison, they would be treated better. 3 meals a day, they'd have a place to sleep, they'd get educated, they'd get a gym. They're just not getting treated nicely. And I don't think it's right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Kevin Merrill.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kevin Merrill. I am an unhoused human being living in the city of Cambridge now for almost 15 years. Mr. Vice Mayor, it's good to see you. Officers of the outreach team, good to see you today. Ladies and gentlemen that have come here with the confidence in themselves that they can stand here and speak before people that may or may not take it out on them once they do get back to where they are placed. Not that that will happen, but it does. I've been in and out of the CASPER program for almost 25 years. I'm a recovering drug addict, still working on that. I'm a recovering homeless addict, still working on that. I've had many friends die in front of me inside of the shelters. I've had many friends die on me outside of the shelters. Then again, these shelters have saved many, many more of my friends. I think what these shelters need to do is get a little bit more of their stuff together or in check, because some of the finest people that I have ever met in my life are sitting in this room right now, work for some of these shelters. But the people that they hire to work there couldn't run a Little League team. Somebody asked if there was anybody here from the Veterans Association, and I don't think there was, but I will qualify. My name is Kevin J. Merrill II, and I am the oldest surviving living blood relative of General Frank D. Merrill, Merrill's Marauders, United States Army. 6 months ago, I had my best friend lay in a bed every 8 hours being checked on by staff members who had no idea what they were checking on. No idea. My best friend, he died of sepsis because we couldn't get him to a hospital fast enough because nobody could make a decision. Now, usually, for people that don't know this, if somebody comes to the door too intoxicated, they usually get the opinion to sit down for a little while. If staff thinks they're too intoxicated, EMTs need to show up. Then the police need to show up. Then the city needs to spend a hell of a lot more money where the money's already being wasted because $6 million of follow-up has, so far at my count, 3 of my friends dead in less than 8 months, 2 of them killed in less than a year, and 1 of them on my back right now, who I did sign up to speak. His name is Stephen M. Thomas, also goes by Kentucky, and is registered at 240 Albany Street. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Stephen Thomas.
Sorry, but you might not be able. This is Stephen Thomas. And I'll stand right here. He is on the
Can guys, we can't do this. We can't have people shouting out from the audience.
This is Stephen M. Thomas's remains, which I am in charge of fully through the court system. So I will stand here with his remains for the remainder of his time. Sorry if this is disturbing anyone. It should. Because if he got the right care, he'd still be here for another 2 minutes and 25 seconds talking. But I'll just let him talk to you. Just keep taking a good look. Not linear. Just noticed nobody from Bay Cove was looking at me. It's interesting.
Yep.
Very interesting. Nine days in a bed in a Bay Cove shelter. 4 days in a bed in Mass General, he was dead. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. He's only one. Thank you.
Yep. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Susan Marchant Lozary.
Yes.
Can you pull the mic?
First of all-
pull the mic down so that you're speaking.
Oh,
right.
sorry, I'm short. Anyways, unfortunately, I was told royalty wouldn't save me, but being royal really. But anyways, I'm here speaking on Princess Diana, when no matter what you say, I thought Princess Diana was a wonderful woman. Queen's Majesty's Army, I don't like being told that, Your Majesty, your chariot awaits in a being ambulance. I don't like being told that royalty won't save me. And I appreciate it. I feel bad for Kentucky. I've seen enough bad stuff at Caspar. I am ashamed. My mother told me, don't let royalty follow me. It's shameful. There's so many homeless. I was told, don't let homeless follow me. Well, where are the homeless going? When there's more homeless than rich, we're at an uneven keel, aren't we? Are you God? Is anyone in God here? No, you're not God. That's what my mother told me. I fight in the name of God, and God be with you and not with the rest of you. Cruelty, I've seen enough. Bed bugs, everything. My great-grandmother from Lithuania, Euskudis, Charles and Mary Euskudis. I dedicate my life to them in Lithuania. Thank you. That's all I need to say. Cruelty is, children were people once. You know, children are people too. They have the rights.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Michelle Pinero. Michelle, you have 3 minutes.
And please speak right into the mic, okay?
Sure. Okay. I'm at Caspar. I've been there for a year. The only thing that I hate, why is that so loud? is they only douche the bathrooms once a week now instead of 2 days a week. It used to be like Monday and Thursdays. And when there's so many people, that's kind of disgusting, but I'm just saying. And another thing is, like the staff, we love most of the staff, except for some of them. We could, want to kill them, but that's besides the point. But they said we couldn't be friendly with the staff. And I don't understand that, because are we supposed to deal with a bunch of assholes or nice people? Okay? Then. A shortage on towels. I couldn't get that out. I don't know if people are stealing the goddamn towels or they're selling them. We don't have enough towels at the place. Anyway, talking from a fat girl, one towel doesn't, I'll be nice, clean one of my cheeks, let's put it that way. And the diabetics that are at Casper, they need special food, which they don't get, sorry. And not for nothing, I've only been to one shelter before Casper, and I think Casper is the cleanest one that I've ever been to, and thank God that I'm there, okay? And medications, like controlled substances and all that crap, they put it in like a money bag. You get the key, then someone else gets the key. Well, I'm not going to mention any names, but a friend of mine, she went to go get her meds, and the bottle was empty. So now I'm on meds, and I don't want to leave it with the front desk, because now I can't trust them after that. It just happened recently, and that's not right. Oh, crap. All right. And Jeff and Maureen, I love you, can be mean, but also times helpful at times. And they can be funny and joke with you. That's what I love about them. And most of the overnight staff, what pisses me off is they sleep. And like if you come out to go to the bathroom, you see them, I was like, wow. If I could get a job there to sleep overnight while everybody else is working, I'd take it. But don't you think that's wrong? Because when we wake up, we catch them, sorry, Maureen, but, sleeping behind the desk. I'm like, what the hell? I don't know. It's crazy, and that's all I have to say. But I say thank God for Casper and Maureen and Jeff. They're the bomb. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Jack Mulhern.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is John Christopher Mulhern. I'm a resident or guest at 240 Albany Street. Tangentially, I'm also the son of a Marine Corps captain. My mother and my father, an Olympic silver medal hockey player and world-class attorney for Suffolk County District Court. So through my notes here, I just want to mention a couple of things. My first experience was at the Transitional Wellness Center. Without being redundant, extremely woefully poorly run by the director there. As much as I want to mention his name, I won't, out of courtesy to the vice mayor. But I don't appreciate, while I was staying there as a supposed guest, when it says Bay Cove, respect is our anthem, and I've read every single word that they printed out, as far as there's no place here for prejudice or human cruelty and so forth, as other people have echoed, and I'm standing here for their behest as well. We're human beings, just like everybody in this room. So without going into all the minutia of what's going on wrong at 240 and the Wellness Center, it's beyond the pale. As Kevin mentioned, I wouldn't let certain people, the director at 240, not Maureen, I'm just going to say his name, Jeff, I wouldn't let him manage a Little League baseball team. That's how woefully incompetent he is. So we have thefts, we have assault and batteries that get ignored when the police show up. John Gunter was assaulted, and the guy who did it is still there as a resident. There are people dealing and selling drugs inside the building every night, and the staff, not Maureen, are woefully indifferent and apathetic to it. Not only that, as someone previously mentioned, they laugh about it, as if human suffering is somehow enjoyable and something to be kidded about. So when they say respect is our anthem and welcome home and you're a human being and here to be treated with kindness and courtesy and so forth, I have ultimate respect for the Cambridge City Council, people in the law, people in these professions and so forth. I come from an extremely, extremely well-educated family. So I'm not here to lie or BS or use foul language or anything like that. But for the next 45 seconds, I want to implant in everyone's brain who works for Bay Cove, I called them the helpline 66 times with no response. So when I had a grievance and went to Jeff, he said, I don't have time, quote, for your delusional ramblings and paranoia. I said, thank you for your time, and I got out of his room and left. That's the person who's getting paid 90 grand, who's rarely ever ubiquitous or there. So the old joke about what's the difference between indifference and apathy, the answer is I don't know and I don't care. That's Jeff incarnate. So I'm advocating not that he get fired, but that somebody do something about this. These people are my friends. We're not MFers. We're not animals. In fact, I could skate metal rings around Jeff anytime I wanted to, including in my sleep. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Our next speaker is Carrie Ballinger. Carrie, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Carrie Ballinger, and I'm pastor at University Lutheran Church, where we have hosted the Harvard Square Homeless Shelter since 1983, and now the shower program that Jim mentioned. Mostly, I'm here to say thank you for all those who've already spoken. It's really important that we have the opportunity to hear the experiences of those who are beneficiaries of these programs that we are trying to provide. I'm really here to talk about my concern that there's going to be funding cut off in June 2025 because of some of the COVID funding that's gone away. At HSHS, we have 18 beds, and we're at capacity all the time. The shower program is always at capacity, and we understand is that there are going to be beds that are going to go away in June. And I just want to make sure people understand that it's not like we can take in more people. And the problem is not getting better. It's getting more and more challenging, and the winter months are coming. And I just think we need to be aware of that. I heard someone say this morning that, the problem seems to be getting better, and I don't know where you are, because that's not what I see. And another thing, just to comment, is that we've had an increase at HSHS with people being dropped off early in the day, coming from hospitals or from maybe they've been released from a program. And I just don't understand how, people think they can. We're not an emergency shelter, actually. And so then we don't know what to do. How do we get the word out to, hospitals and other places that you can't just dump people? That's not how you treat human beings. You don't just dump people and expect that they're going to find their way. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but I think we need better communication overall between our different community partners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Christine Mumm. Christine, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I have a rhetorical question, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but HSHS took me in for the summer. I appreciated that because I'd been trying for a very long time in overflow to get a bed at 240. I had a friend there who did it's a dry shelter, right? It's a dry shelter. He stayed the whole time. He managed to stay the whole time. He stayed clean. He stayed there the whole time. It closed for the summer, and he's dead. Do we only exist when it's open? You put people out, you take people in, and then you put them out and they die. What good is that to people? The other thing I want to talk about is human feces in the shower. October the 13th, not the first time I've seen it, but the first time I've written the date down. October 13th, Sunday night, shit in the shower, excuse my language, human feces in the bathroom, on the floor, multiple places. We tell the staff, they say, it's not our job to clean that up. We'll tell the crew in the morning. You know when it was cleaned up? It was cleaned up on the night of October the 15th by one of our residents who uses a rollator, who is immunocompromised, who had to take gloves and cleaning products that we're not even supposed to have access to, and we cleaned it ourselves. We're showering in places that there's shit on the floor. I was in overflow for a very long time. They keep the pillows on the bathroom floor, in the staff bathroom, on the floor. You asked how you can help us? Get us an overdose prevention center. We've been asking for years. There's one in New York. They have not had a single death there. Get us a fucking overdose prevention center. Stop killing us slowly and let us live.
Naomi, just so I have a sense of time, because I can't see, I don't have access to the screen. How many more speakers do we have?
We are at one more speaker, and then there's a person with their hand raised in the Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Erin Aslami. Erin, you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name's Erin. I'm a student at Harvard Divinity School, and I've been helping out with the church's meal program. So I would like to bring forward some concerns that I've heard from guests there while I'm having dinner with them. Hopefully I can be a conduit for them in some way. So first of all, I'd like to bring up some accountability for grievances when they're filed in the shelters, including transparency to each guest about the overall process, perhaps when they come in, and also transparency to each guest who files a grievance about the status of their claim as it moves forward. I'd also like to echo Charity's comment that we must see more explicitly trauma-informed care and services so that we can put forward some more consistent and respectful care from staff to the shelter guests. Also, I'd like to put forward accountability and transparency about physical and mental health care, including procedures to address sometimes serious injuries which occur during people's stays. These can include infections and even just down to regular dispensing daily medications. And lastly, I've heard concern that housing is not treated as a human right and that guests may be kicked out of the shelter even for minor transgressions, and they may be left to suffer in the cold without follow-up or additional support. The guests I speak to would like to put forward that these individuals who experience agitation may require the most support from us. They're often at most risk of crisis or death on the street and often receive the least support. So we must start a compassionate and attentive conversation about the complex issue of infrastructure for these individuals who also have an unconditional right to shelter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Martha Veli-Gas. Martha, you can unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Martha Veli-Gas, and I am the chair of the advisory board of the Tuesday Meals program at First Parish Church in Harvard Square. We do also house the Y2Y shelter program, but I'm just speaking from my experience working with our guests who come Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 3:30 to 6:30, so they're welcome to be there for 3 hours. And I'm coming to support them because they go to the shelters, and I definitely want to say I'm in support of increasing the shelter capacity in the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor McGovern, you have one more person in the audience who would like to speak. Robin Lutjohan, please go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
And also, Naomi, I think Cassie heard, she may be promoted to a panelist, but give her the floor next.
Yep, you have also Brian Sink, who has their hand up in the Zoom.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Robin Lutjohan. I am the pastor at Faith Lutheran Church, one of the pastors. We also run together with one of the local synagogues the Faith Kitchen Meal Program. And so I've had a variety of touch points with folks experiencing homelessness in the city. And my main reason to speak is to echo my colleague, Reverend Carrie Ballinger, in asking for a serious consideration of the impending loss of shelter beds due to the federal funding running out. Look, I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of the budget, but it does seem to me as if Our city is sometimes really ingenious in coming up with money where there was none, when it seems to really matter to the right people. But when it comes to something like this, we are often reminded of, well, you know, what can we do? The money's not there. And it doesn't feel like a very good moment to lose a bunch of shelter beds. I'm really worried about it, and I'm glad we're talking about it now because it's coming down the pike. The other thing that I wanted to say is, you know, I haven't been to one of these meetings in quite some time. And I've been around here doing this kind of work for about 10 years. And what strikes me is that I'm hearing basically the same things I would have heard 10 years ago. Isn't that interesting? Like, I'm basically hearing the same things. Need for an overdose prevention facility, not enough spaces, and some really great difficulties with the quality of some of the larger shelter spaces, amidst also a great deal of appreciation for a lot of the people who work there. This is exactly the sort of stuff I used to hear when I used to visit 240 Albany with the Reverend Jed Manis of blessed memory when I was his intern, and people would say the same sort of stuff. There's just kind of low-level, you know, disrespect, and sometimes pretty intensely so. And I wonder if this is something we can pay some special attention to, because it seems to me a matter of quality control, which is the sort of practical know-how type of thing that a lot of the smart heads in a city like Cambridge could attend to and fix. You know, that's not a multi-million-dollar budget issue. That's a very practical day-to-day sort of thing about hiring and quality control. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor McGovern, you have Brian Sink. Brian?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Brian Sink. I'm the program manager for Fenway Health's Access Drug User Health Program. We're located in Central Square. What I've heard today is exactly what I have unfortunately heard from a variety of clients over the years, feeling oftentimes dehumanized, issues around theft, issues around overdoses that occur on site. Where clients of the shelter system will alert staff or try to intervene on their own behalf, and they are prevented from doing so or made to feel bad for trying to alert staff and intervene with Narcan of their own. I've had a working partnership with most of the shelter providers trying to offer Narcan and training, harm reduction training, and oftentimes I feel deprioritized. But I'm here today to recommit to try to do our best to partner to make sure that the shelters have what they need by way of Narcan, training, sharps containers, to best serve the folks that we share a partnership with. And so, you know, it's very difficult to hear a lot of these stories. I echo what others have said before, in that while I appreciate this opportunity to speak and that this forum is being held, I just have not seen a lot of action over the years and a lot of prioritization. So in short, what I'd really like to see is some sort of reform made on the grievance policy, something that could be, I don't know, funneled directly to the city, or even maybe using us as a place where they could submit them and then we submit them to the city, just to make sure that they're reviewed and followed up on and investigated as needed. I think, you know, just my heart breaks thinking of the folks who are no longer with us, who I've heard stories like this with, who, as Dan said earlier, you know, this is not a shelter system is not the end goal. Folks have been staying at these shelters for years on end, and it's terribly demoralizing. And so I know we can do better, and I commit myself and our organization to work towards that goal. So thank you for allowing me some time to speak today.
Thank you.
Cassie Hurd, you can unmute yourself. Yep, please go ahead.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie. I work at the Maternal Aid and Advocacy Program. Thank you so much to Jeremy and Kevin Chrissy for sharing. In the past 17 years of working with folks who are unhoused and people who use drugs, folks have continuously just shared how seasonal and year-round shelters in Cambridge don't meet their needs. I'm going to share some information that folks have shared with us. In 2021, staff and organizers and research partners interviewed 113 community members at MAP about their experiences and needs and visions for a system of care. And out of the 113 people, 76 said they'd attempted to access shelter in Cambridge. And 43 people said they were only able to access shelter sometimes or rarely, so less than half the time. And 10 people had never been able to access shelter, though they tried. And we shared today's opportunity to share with folks. And just like truly, I'm so grateful for the folks who overcame the barriers to be there and know that people have so many other survival needs they could be meeting. And this is so important to their survival that they showed up. And we shared a survey with folks that community members developed last week, and 14 people responded. And though the number is much smaller, the needs people shared are the same, and they're, I'm sorry, I'm feeling a bit rushed for time. I think what was a big difference was that there were significantly fewer people who are able to access shelter, and increasingly people are accessing shelter outside of the city or being criminalized for surviving outside when shelter is a false choice. I'm just gonna, list out some of the reasons people said shelter isn't working for them. That people have been barred, there's no meaningful restorative justice process, accessing a spot is opaque or inaccessible, there's a lot of times technology involved, the norms, expectations, processes, as Charity noted, are unclear or vague or inequitably enforced, especially when someone is assumed to be a person who uses drugs or a person on MAT. The omnipresence of police and security instead of staff adept at preventing and responding to crisis, the challenging nature of seasonal shelters, seasonal shelters being an opportunity for learning or resume material instead of for actually supporting people, the inability to bring in certain medications. Is there any way I can extend my time?
Cassie, you're actually a panelist, so.
Amazing. The inability to bring in certain supplies or medications, sharps, whether for use, for tea, for insulin, pipes. In some spaces, people have been told they have to throw out, they're in a lock zone. And then most commonly, people are, as I said, increasingly saying there is not space for them, even a mat on the floor. I want to offer some quotes from community members that people have already, shared so eloquently. I think I have 4 quotes from folks. One person said, "I haven't had much trouble with shelter staff, though I haven't stayed in shelter much. I've typically stay outside with my people where my sanity and safety isn't at the whim of a student who has somehow been charged with the oversight of a seasonal shelter as their pet project. We're homeless all year. Seasonal shelters seem to not make sense. No one has the training or, to be fair, support they deserve to be successful in these jobs, and then they end up treating people poorly. I know what I'm saying is an understatement. We're just conditioned to be grateful, and it's a real risk to share our expertise or ideas, so it's hard for me to share in what feels like such a formal format." Someone else said, "I generally don't expect much from the staff when I'm able to stay at a shelter. I try to stay out of their way and hope they won't make trouble for me. The staff at 240 are brutal. They make problems out of nothing and rules out of nowhere. The second they're challenged or not even challenged, called out for being unfair, it's game over. I was kicked out in what felt like less than a minute. I was also barred. Maybe there's a process for getting back in, but why would I want to go somewhere where it clearly doesn't want to serve me or people like me? It feels like they're in the wrong business at this point. The warming center can be okay, but things pop off. Some of us have been up for days or get asked to leave after picking up supplies with them, and then we come back acting a certain way and staff members get pissed. Someone else said, the problem is that the shelter management aren't bad people, but they're not the most suited or trained. A former manager at one seasonal shelter was great with the guys, but didn't treat women or trans people well, including staff. The way he spoke was really intimidating. He believes in tough love when we know that approach doesn't work. They noted that people are dying because of that approach. They said they've experienced such trauma that really bubbles up when they're treated in those ways. And they were directly told they were ungrateful. They're grateful for so little. Another person said shelter staff really profile and make assumptions about many of us perhaps doing certain things, even when done outside the shelter, how we make our living, if we have medical issues, or if we have certain habits. Our bags get checked more thoroughly. They come into our space more frequently. I get asked about conversations I'm having by staff more frequently. I've tried to actually have conversations with them and shelter security, but staff really blew up. It told me it wasn't my place to try to bring them into a conversation. I just want to get things resolved so I have a safe place to stay. And then sort of processes and policies that people shared that could improve their experiences at shelter are some of what folks, Charity and Brian and community members already shared of requiring shelters to have transparent, clear, and consistent processes, both written and verbal, that communicate sort of expectations and also consequences so people can make informed decisions. Removing police and heavy security presence from shelters, which wouldn't be necessary if staff was trained and the shelters were operating in trauma-informed ways, and utilizing harm reduction strategies to stop barring and trespassing people, and to develop more immediate steps to reduce and address harm for heading out the people's space. Creating minimum shelter staff training and qualifications that focus on safety, equity, cultural competency, including people's habits, moving away from seasonal shelters, and then implementing an ombudsman, or sort of, as Brian shared, having the opportunity for like external organizations to support people and be neutral parties and looking into grievances and lead a transparent process. And then outside the city shelters, folks said the city should be, as others have stated, investing meaningfully in overdose prevention centers that are community-based and ending the criminalization of people's survival. Thank you for allowing me to go over that time. And again, so appreciate folks for sharing, and hope this will be the beginning of a conversation about how shelter can better meet folks' needs and like making that actionable.
Thank you. Guys, can we, on a motion by Councillor Wilson to close public comment, roll call?
Vice Mayor McGovern.
Yes?
Councillor Nolan is absent. Councillor Siddiqui. Councillor Siddiqui. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler. Councillor Wilson.
Yes.
Councillor Siddiqui.
I'm a yes too. Yes.
Councillor Siddiqui is a yes. Councillor Sabrina Wheeler is absent. That's 3 members voting yes, 2 recorded as absent.
Thank you. Let the record show that Mayor Simmons is with us as well. Okay, well, thank you to everyone who spoke. I know that was not easy. It was not easy, I think, for you to share your stories. I'm sure it wasn't easy for folks to hear those stories. I think it's a testament to just how complicated things are, and how we have to be always trying to improve in what we do and how we serve folks. As difficult as it was to hear those stories, if we don't put the stories out there so that people can hear them and know about them, we can't get better, right? And this is all about wanting to get better. I believe sincerely that the folks who run the shelters want to run quality programs. We certainly know that the people who stay at the shelters deserve and want to be treated respectfully and with dignity. I forget which of the speakers said this, but those of you who've heard me talk about these issues before know what I'm going to say, is that, you know, I ask everybody that I talk to about these kinds of issues, have you ever asked a child what they wanted to be when they grew up? And everybody says yes. And then I say, did any of those children ever say homeless? And we forget sometimes that the folks that we're serving were 10-year-old kids once who wanted something really different for their lives. That's right. And I also acknowledge that it's hard because there are a lot of issues that that people bring to the table, right? Because there's trauma, there's mental health, there's substance use, there's a lot of structural problems within the system in terms of, you know, working the overnight shift on a Saturday when you're not getting paid really well is probably not a great job. And so finding staff, finding folks that have experience, you know, is challenging. And it's challenging when I think when you constantly feel like you are pushing a boulder up a hill in a system that is just broken. And so it gets frustrating, and those frustrations can leak over into interactions with the people that we're serving. But the flip side of that is that these are professions and these are jobs that people have chosen to take, and fields, professional fields that people have chosen to go into. And so the ultimate responsibility on those situations and who is responsible to mitigate those situations and to act professionally are the professionals. And so how do we help do that? And how can the city be helpful to the shelters? There was a question I just want to get out of the way real quickly about the living wage question. I believe, Ellen, you're nodding. I believe we did provide more funding so that folks could be getting paid what the city's living wage is. So some salaries for staff have increased, but we also all know that Cambridge and Boston in this area is incredibly expensive, and you know, you even with those increases in salaries, you're still talking about people who are at sometimes just one paycheck away from maybe being in one of those shelters in which they're working at, right? So it's very, very complicated, and there are many layers to it. But that cannot be an excuse for us not to do better. So I'll go first of all. Let me see if any of my colleagues on the committee have any questions first. Councilor Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair, and thank you all to those who spoke in public comment, online or in person. And thank you to the shelters who are representing here, because I think, again, many of what we heard really has a lot to do with thinking about how we're looking at trainings, thinking about how we're assessing, evaluating, and being true to supporting the lives of people who are most at need, meeting them where they're at, and trying to help and support maybe somewhat of a treatment plan or whatever the case is in terms of how we're supporting individuals. So I think some of the questions that I have really just goes back to staff trainings, and so I'm curious if folks could speak to what trainings are actually being offered, how often are they actually happening, and is there ever time for cross-collaboration? Do you all do trainings together amongst different services across the city of Cambridge?
Yeah, thank you. That's to the shelter providers? Anyone want to talk about? And I think if I can expand it, I had similar, training, supervision, and accountability. There are obviously individual stories, but a lot of it sort of falls under those larger umbrellas. So if we can have folks from the shelters just talk about what training do you provide in terms of what supervision is provided, what is the accountability for staff, and I think a great point of the training, a lot of times people get trained when they first get hired to a job. And I'm not saying this is about the shelters, but when you start a job, you get onboarded, you get trained, and then oftentimes you don't get consistent training after that, and it's very easy sometimes to forget what you were trained to do. And so are there follow-up trainings? Is there ongoing support for staff? So if folks could speak to that, that would be great. And I'll go to Bay Cove first.
Sure. So in addition to our onboarding training, thank you, we provide annual training in crisis prevention. We follow the MANT system. We provide introduction to trauma-informed care. We provide harm reduction in substance use. And in addition to a lot of other trainings, but I think those ones are very specific or important for the work that we do in the shelters. I will say that when it comes to trainings, part of our challenge is the amount of staff turnover that we have. So even when we feel confident that we have provided sufficient training for people and are able to then continue to work with them through supervision, the staff leave, and then we're bringing in new staff who we need to, again, train and continue to support. We do have a progressive disciplinary process with our staff. So if it is clear that staff are not understanding how to engage appropriately with individuals in the shelter services, we are working with them, providing them additional support and supervision, but we do ultimately have to take disciplinary action and have terminated employees as a result, which again creates this inconsistency of having consistent staff. So not to minimize the concerns, because the concerns that were brought up in this hearing are very valid, and people's experiences are valid. The challenges that we face with our staffing is the being able to have consistent staff to be able to really get them on board with these, with these systems and these models, so that we have a really well-developed staff.
Just a follow-up. Do you have a sense of, obviously there's probably various reasons, personal and otherwise, for the staff turnover, but do you see, is it a question of money? Is it a question of lack of upward mobility? Is it a question of they feel overwhelmed? All of the above.
It's all of the above. I think, these are not well-paid positions. We often have staff who are working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. It becomes very difficult and stressful to kind of juggle having multiple jobs. We have people that are staff that want to go back to school, and it's difficult because for them to work the schedules and have the kind of the flexibility of managing their class schedules. We do have a lot of staff who come into this field and then through experiences of working with the individuals or the guests within the shelter system just realize that this isn't the population they want to be working with. Again, I do not want to minimize anyone's experience, but the respect goes both ways, and our staff often are the recipients of also of disrespectful, threatening, aggressive behavior, and that does impact people's job satisfaction, and they do choose to leave this field or the shelter work to maybe go into a different program that is a better fit for them.
Thank you. And just with the other shelters, if you, to Councilor Wilson's question around training and supervision and accountability, can you speak to what you do in your programs, Karen? And you need the mic.
I have a loud voice, so I usually probably don't even need a microphone Just recently on June 6th, we did a first aid mental health training. There was a 2-day training that was provided by Cambridge Health Alliance also, which ended up really well. We do a staff meeting every other week, a mandatory staff meeting for all staff members to attend. So then we discuss issues. If there's a grievance report given, the grievance report has to be on my desk within 24 hours, and then I will speak to the person that has filed the grievance and then speak to the staff also. So in our logbook, if there was an issue with a client, I would see that, then I would expect to see a grievance report. We just had CPR and first aid. Unfortunate, because I was thinking that the staff member that's been there the least is probably 3 years. So that's it.
Jim?
We're very fortunate at First Church. We've had a relatively stable staff. I'm not even the most senior person there. There are people who've been there longer than me.
Hard to
So,
believe.
yeah, I know. When you look at a guy like me, yeah. So, but we try to make sure people cycle through relevant training every 2 years. We've had folks recently complete training around HIV, recently completed units around overdose. We're constantly looking for opportunities to give our employees an opportunity to be better able to respond, but I'm sure there are things we could do better, but by and large, I think we do okay. And I should mention that, we only have 14 people in the shelter, so it's a different type of environment. We able to get a, sort of a consistency and a sense of community because, even people in the shelter are only dealing with another dozen or so people. So the level of static and stress is a lot less at places like us. So does that speak to your question?
Yes, Y2Y and Harvard Square?
Yeah, mostly reiterating prior points surrounding trainings. The fact is, as a seasonal and student-run shelter, we too have a lot of turnover. And how we work to address that as much as we can is by having annual trainings, even for staff that have been with us prior. But it's not limited to that. If we see issues arising in the shelter repeatedly among staff, or as needs evolve in the population that we're serving, we will have ad hoc trainings on different topics as well, in an effort to keep our staff as updated as possible. The fact is, we're still limited, but we're attempting to grow in this respect as much as we can. And trainings would address mostly what's been talked about already, addressing harm reduction, overdose, cultural sensitivity, harm reduction, among other things. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on to that a little bit, and apologies, I've lost my voice a little. So I'm representing Harvard Square. We have a 4-week kind of training program at the beginning of our season for returning staff and new staff alike. This training program includes training on our policies. So this is not just training staff on what the policies are themselves, but also training on the enforcement of policies, how to mitigate bias in the enforcement. And this is also training on our grievance procedures and how to direct guests to our guest rights officer. Or we also partner with the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance, who has kind of a separate avenue for guest appeals. So making sure all of our staff is on the same page about communicating those resources to our guests. Other trainings that we offer include much of what has been mentioned before, introduction to trauma-informed care. We do some trainings in partnership with Y2Y, which has been really helpful to both shelters. Crisis prevention and emergency procedures, Narcan training and CPR certification. Also making sure our staff is competent in the maintenance of our physical space and our technology apparatuses, so that staff can be effective in operating in the space and responding to guest concerns. And also training on our security and intake procedures. And then also similar to what's been expressed by others, we have a mandatory weekly staff meeting where we can kind of offer ad hoc trainings and just kind of the constant spread of information relative to situations that we actively see arising in the shelter. And those are a really effective way at making sure staff stay up to date on all of the relevant policies and just really enabling staff to respond effectively to situations as they're coming up, and they're not limited by this training that they had 6 months ago at the beginning of the season.
Thank you. Councilor Wilson.
Thank you. And I do know a few folks had came in while the after the meeting had started, so we didn't get introductions. So if you could just say your name and where you represent, and then we'll come down the list, down the road, please.
Hi, I'm Charles Hollins, and I've been at Bay Cove Human Services for almost nearly 30 years. And I am the Director of Advocacy. I'm responsible for government and community relations for the organization.
And then you guys, we didn't get your names.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm the co-administrative director of the Harvard Square Homeless Shelter.
And I'm Najati, and I'm the administrative director of Why Do I Harvard Square.
Did you sign in here? Can I just pass this around, just so that the clerk has spellings correct, first and last names? Yeah?
I'm Kit Carroll. I work with the Phillips Brooks House Association, which is the larger nonprofit for both Y2Y and Harvard Square Homeless Shelter.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And another question, it's just like a bulk question. It's really, Assistant City Manager Seminoff, you spoke to salaries have been able to be increased based on some resources through the city of Cambridge. I'm curious, like, what is that salary right now for our workers? What is the average amount of hours that our workers, so like how many full-time, how many part-time, and what are some of the professional backgrounds? So I know maybe for the colleges, it's mostly like college students, maybe it's more volunteer, but if you could speak to that a little bit. And then those who are like full-time, what are like the benefits and stuff that folks are receiving?
Ellen, I don't think you can
I think
answer
the
all,
answer,
but
excuse me, I think the answer was, the question, let me make sure, would be better answered by the actual program operators. I think you're right, we have provided some more funding. You're right, we have provided some more funding, but they would be able to answer the questions about the salary ranges as well as about the professional experiences of their staff.
okay. Bay Cove?
So for our direct care shelter support worker position, the starting pay rate is $19.20 an hour.
Staff do you have at full-time, and how many might be part-time?
We have a number of vacancies right now, but if we were fully staffed, we should have, I'm going to do the math really quick in my head. So 7 potentially full-time, and then probably additional 7 part-time. We also have shift leaders on the second and overnight shifts. That position pays $22 an hour, I think. I didn't come 100% prepared. It's $22 or $24 an hour. And then we also have a shelter clinician position, which would be a licensed mental health worker or social worker. Unfortunately, that position is currently vacant, but that pays, I believe it's $60,000, $65,000, something around there.
The other shelters, just what are your staff? What do they earn? What's
I'm
the
trying to
staffing look
figure
like?
it out.
Okay, well, you can maybe get us that.
I'm using my
If you don't have
finger,
it, you can-
yeah.
And I can send it out in an email.
Yeah, the average, yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, yes. So mostly, again, free volunteer-run shelters. However, we do have a number of part-time employees that we hire to kind of supplement the college student nature of the shelters. And base rate is $25 an hour. Roughly, I would say it's hard to come up with an average for experience, but at least 10 years in the field for the folks that we're hiring part-time in the shelters.
At First Church, we got a range from like 22 and Liz, what do we pay navigators? Ballpark? What? 60? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and
Did you say that we couldn't hear her?
oh, 65? Yeah, 60 to 65, and that would be an LICSW. Yeah, not an LICSW, but a licensed clinical social worker. And then, oh, that's right. You guys all know about that, right? So, and we have operated for years on a lot of part-time people. So there's technically only like three full-time employees, and then we have a lot of people who work like 2 shifts. Sometimes those shifts are as short as 4 hours. Is that helpful? Okay.
Yes, very. Thank you. I yield for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Siddiqui or Sabrina Wheeler, did anyone members have their hands up? No? Okay. Any of Madam Mayor, did you?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Sabrina Wheeler put his hand up.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to city staff and others for the presentation and for all the folks who showed up for public comment. I had one question at the moment about just how the changes in the past year or so with the state emergency shelter system have affected operations in the city, just what that's looked like as policies have changed and as we've seen sort of more influxes of
First time I've been out in 3 years. Yeah.
getting a little feedback.
Yeah. Can you repeat the question again? Maybe slow down just a little bit.
Yep.
It's hard. It's hard to hear you.
All right. Yeah. Just asking what the impact of changes in the state emergency shelter system have been like for shelters in Cambridge, if that's been significant or if it's a little bit of a different population. I'm just curious how that has affected local operations.
So is the state emergency shelter have any impact on you guys at all? Have you seen any increases maybe in folks at your shelters or any impact on you?
You mean at the Registry of Deeds or
Councilor Sabrina?
We have deeds at their state shelters, just as the state policies have changed. Has that led to more people in Cambridge shelters? Has that not really been the case because it's a different population? Just interested in that.
Okay, Ellen, you have a...
I'm wondering if what Councilor Sabrina Wheeler is talking about is really on the family shelter side and the in terms of the state changes that have come. And I think that for the most part, while it's possible that individuals who are part of families have showed up in the individual shelter system, I think the major changes are on the family side.
Is that to the shelter providers, or is that what you're seeing? And do you think have you seen any increases in your facilities based people coming from those shelters, or?
I'll never miss a chance to grouse about something. We have at least 5 people who reach out to us every day looking for shelter, and they're calling usually from a payphone or they've borrowed someone's cell phone because there's no place for them to engage and get services. There's plenty of people who would like to help them, but they don't have the capacity. And we have a 14-bed shelter. We can try to refer people, but you have to sort of roll your eyeballs when you think, well, I'm going to refer you to a place. I know they're going to tell you the same thing, that we don't have the capacity to respond. And one last thing to grouse about, the state keeps saying, oh, we have money, but we can't get anybody to cite and run these programs. And I'm like, well, is it just upon the private sector or just upon the church community or something to step forward and say, all right, we're going to do this? Can't municipalities and other regional organizations step up and say, yeah, well, we got this skating rink or some other facility like that. We can at least, to get the strain out of the system, throw up some services here. But I just don't feel like enough entities in different settings, whether it be like the state or the municipal level, want to take full accountability for this they want to be able to wring their hands about it and say, oh, what are we going to do about all these people? But, oh, geez, no churches or nobody else wants to say you can use our basement. Or as often happens, and I kind of understand it, it's like they go in and they say, we want this space to be available for you to use. And they go in and they go, oh, well, you don't have sprinklers here and you don't. And they're all legitimate safety concerns, but I just can't help but think if we're talking about a different population, that there would be ways to address that. It's not as if the building is collapsing or anything. You have a wake supervision, so if there is some emergency, people can get out of the building, So there's lots of unmet need. I think it's more visible with families, but people are just sort of used to the fact that, there's homeless individuals. Yeah, there always are. And we certainly should be able to do better for those people, I think.
Okay, thank you. I want to be a little mindful of the time. We have 15 minutes. Councilor Sabrina Wheeler, do you have other questions? And pertaining to maybe some of the topics that were brought up today?
That's it for now. I'll yield.
Thank you. Mayor Simmons, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair and Vice Mayor. First, I wanted to acknowledge and just thank you for having this hearing because I think it's really important. And I do apologize for coming late. One of the questions may have been answered, so I apologize in advance if I'm asking again. When we were talking about, I think something that the young lady from Bay Cove said, when we were talking about the interactions between staff and consumer of the services, could you talk a little bit, and again, I apologize if this has been mentioned, is there a clear method by which you convey to the consumers of your program around what the expectations are? Because I heard something about complaints, number one, and number two, that sometimes staff is treated harshly, and I'm just wondering, and it certainly goes both ways. Staff get treated harshly. Consumers may not be so nice, but it's always important, I think, when you have it clearly spelled out what the expectations are. So, do you have a written protocol? Is there sign off on that protocol? So how does that work?
Eiko?
Yes. So when guests enter our shelter services, they are given a guest handbook that kind of goes over what our grievance policy and procedures are. It talks about what the expectations are, kind of talks about schedule of kind of operations. Those are also posted within the shelter, so because we understand that you get a handbook, it gets put somewhere, so those are also posted throughout the shelter. And obviously, if anybody wanted that to be issued to them again, we would give them another handbook. So we try to make those as accessible and as public so that the guests are aware and are able to go to the bulletin board or refer to their handbooks, or try to ensure that the expectations are clear. I do think the biggest challenge that we have is ensuring that things are that there's consistency and that we are human, and as much as we try to ensure that staff A is doing everything like staff B and staff C and staff D, we understand and acknowledge that there are discrepancies at times, and we work really hard based on feedback from consumers or guests when there are inconsistencies to address those and to make improvements. While I have the mic too, I also just want to clarify that when you were asking about staffing, my mind went straight to 240, so I only gave you staffing for one shelter. We also, have staff at 240 and, at the Transitional Wellness Center. So like if you're talking about how many staff we have in total, we're probably, around 20 staff.
And I wanted to make sure we got Green Street. It's hard. I can't see the screen, so sometimes I forget who's online. The Green Street shelter, if you can, the last question we had was about what training your staff goes through. If you could answer that and answer Mayor Simmons' question about the rules and posted rules, and do people know, do your guests
Do
know the
people know, do they have a
procedures?
sign off? You know, oftentimes what a person may say, if I may, well, they may have read it, they may not have read it, and so sometimes organizations, I don't know what the shelter does, but I'm just trying to get some clarity. Is there some acknowledgement that the person received the information so that there's, you know, on both sides, there's accountability? Because the first thing someone might say is, well, I didn't know. You didn't give that to me. And so in terms of being able to support a person having a safe experience there, you want to be sure that they are aware of what their expectations are.
So Green Street, can you, training and the accountability sign-off procedure piece? Are they still there?
Who were we hearing from for Green Street? Mr. James, yep, please go ahead.
So to answer your, thank you first for having us here today. So as far as trainings, we have Narcan, CPR, first aid, crisis prevention, sexual harassment. We did take a trauma-informed de-escalation class. I believe that was sponsored by Cambridge. That was at the YCA. We also have recovery coach training and safe serve as well. Mental health training was just completed with the case managers within this last month. As far as policies, every guest that is entered into the center does complete a guidelines policy. They do sign off on that. They are giving a copy of the policy and that they did sign off, and that goes into their intake folder.
Madam Mayor?
Their policy is also up on the wall, because sometimes we do have guests that say, well, you didn't give me, I don't know, can't find, and it's like, okay, go get the policy that you were handed when you came in, because we clearly do get a signature of that. As far as like during trade-off of shifts, we do have a logbook that we keep very well recorded, and each shift person that comes in is required to read that log. We give updates to each other just to say what's happening. This is a wet shelter, which can be kind of difficult because, again, it's wet. So you can come in, you know, as you want to. You are not allowed to bring anything in place that could harm you and things like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the other service providers. So is that the standard? Does each facility have a program through which the rules and regulations, for lack of a way of saying it, have a sign-off component? And again, it goes both ways. It's so that you are protecting yourselves and you're protecting the consumer. So I would be interested in knowing, is that the standard?
On intake, we have a rules and regulations that they're given, and they have to sign that. We go over, there's about 4 or 5 rules in that we have them initial, because we will not keep your property over 24 hours. The medication, no cell phone use in this area. So that way we keep that in a file, so that way they know that the rules and regulations, the reason we have them initial it and have the staff read it to them, because when they come back 3 days later, if their belongings may not be there, we have written your belongings will be held for 24 hours.
Thank you. And from the others?
Similarly, when people come into the shelter, we have this thing called the guest letter. We ask the guests to read it. If they have any questions, then we try to respond to it. We show them how to navigate safely through the shelter. And then there's a set of rules we ask them to read and ask them to sign off indicating that they understand those things. And we have them posted around the shelter. But people living in challenging circumstances, I don't think it's unusual for them to kind of not recall. So sometimes we have to sort of remind folks that they agreed to that. So.
Thank you. Baycove?
Baco, you guys went.
So just to confirm, yes, so guests will sign off that they received the handbook and that that the expectations, the operations of the shelter were reviewed with them. In addition, we have a separate sign off that we used indicating that they've understand what the grievance policy and procedure is and have them sign that as well.
If I may, Mr. Chair, through you to the young lady from Bay Cove, but I'm not talking about grievance procedures particularly. I'm just saying, just rules and regulations.
Yes.
What's the expectations?
Yes.
What we expect from the consumer? What the consumer can expect from us? That kind of thing. So this really wasn't around grievance. It's about knowledge of operations and expectations.
Yes, so when we have them sign off that they received that as well and that we reviewed it with them.
Yeah, speaking on behalf of Y2Y, very similar process with guest intake where they have to go through a guest handbook that requires staff sign off as well. Something I would like to clarify too is that we ideally aim to do more than just read the policies to them and just get them to sign off at the end, because the fact is it is a lot of information. And as you mentioned earlier, a lot of these guests are going through extremely tough experiences, so it's not surprising to forget a lot of the information that's given to you at that point. So what we really aim to do through that intake process is ensure that the guest has an internalized understanding of what they're reading, right? And currently what we're aiming to do too is to have opportunities to remind guests about policy as an accountability piece, not just for them, but for staff as well. Because the fact is we need to ensure consistency as a matter of equity and trust in the shelter, and that goes with the application of our policies as well.
Thank you. I yield.
Yeah, and just, sorry, adding on to that from Harvard Square Homeless Shelter. So we take a lot of steps towards making sure our policies are clear and workable for our guests. This starts before we do intake with our guests. We always review our policy book with the Massachusetts Housing and Shelter Alliance to vet our policies and make sure that they are fair and worded in a way that is clear and will be accessible for our guests. Every guest who comes into our shelter does a one-on-one intake with a director of the shelter where all of the key policies are discussed, and this is an opportunity for guests to ask questions about shelter policies and receive explanations about why we do things the way that we do. This does require a signature. We also have signs clearly delineating our key policies all around our space. And then importantly, we also outline in this intake procedure that when it comes to enforcing our policies, we really want to be able to enforce policy in a way such that we can intervene early before a potential issue has arisen to the point where it might warrant dismissal from the shelter or anything kind of at that level. So we have a policy where anytime an issue starts to arise, we have staff initiate a policy agreement conversation where the policy is reviewed and the guest and staff work together to develop a policy support plan to make sure that our guests will be able to meet our expectations and make sure on the staff end we're doing everything we can to put our guests in a position where they are able to thrive in our shelter space.
Before we go on, we're up against the time now. We did start 10 minutes late, so I'm going to ask that we extend for 10 minutes so we get the full 2 hours. Roll call.
Vice Mayor McGovern?
Yes.
Counselor Nolan is absent. Counselor Siddiqui?
Yes.
Counselor Sabrina Wheeler?
Yes.
Counselor Wilson?
Okay.
That's 4 members voting yes. You also have Counselor Siddiqui's hand raised in the Zoom.
Okay. Counselor Siddiqui, you have the floor.
Thank you. I am not sure if this was answered, but I know some of this came up during public comment. But as far as the shelter bed capacity, around Cambridge, what are do we have the data on how many we would lose given the funding? And I'm sorry if I missed that, but I wanted to make sure to ask that.
A number of us were concerned about the transitional wellness center going down. That's a significant number of beds, and it isn't clear to some of us in the provider community that some of the other things underway now are going to be at a level to sort of compensate for that lack of access. So is that relevant? Was that in the vicinity of what you were asking?
So I think, yes, Counselor Siddiqui, I think what Counselor Siddiqui, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we heard that ARPA money is going away, or federal money is going away, that we are paying for the wellness center, we are funding the wellness center with those funds. So when those funds go away, as of now, those beds are going away. Now, Norfolk Street is opening with SROs, and a lot of the folks who are at the wellness center, I believe, Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was many of those folks will transition to the SROs, but you're still talking about a net loss of beds, because it's not keeping the wellness center and adding Norfolk Street. And so, Ellen, if you could just, and I
Right,
do want to,
exactly.
and I do want to, again, because of the time, I don't want to go down, because this is sort of a separate conversation from the call of the meeting, which is what's going on in the shelter. Jim, I see you jumping at the microphone, but I'd like you just, Ellen, if you could just clarify that and we can move on.
What I would say is you're correct about Norfolk Street opening and that some of the guests of the Wellness Center will go there. It isn't only guests from the Wellness Center who will be eligible to go to 116 Norfolk Street. There are many other individuals in shelters around, but the result of the opening of Norfolk Street is that those 60-plus permanent supported housing individuals studio rooms will be available to help alleviate overall folks who are either living on the street or living in shelter. And I think the other comment is that Jim is right that both the ARPA funding that covers many of the things we spoke about, the navigation, the showers, there are a large number of things related to our services for individuals who are unhoused are currently funded with ARPA funding, which we know we have an ARPA cliff for.
And I actually think that the next to Cambridge Rise, ARPA money for the unhoused population was the largest expenditure at about $18 million. So the question is what, I don't know if we can replace all $18 million out of the general budget, but what things can we continue to fund and what things are we going to have to move on from? So, Councilor Siddiqui?
Yes, thank you. I yield.
Councilor Zuzzi?
Quick question, and I also want to applaud all of you for this meeting. It's been fabulous and very informative, and I'm grateful to everyone for honestly sharing their experiences and how they're helping others. Two quick questions. It sounds like finding really great staffing is a challenge, and I wondered, hospitals always have interns and residents who are training and working at the hospitals. Do social work programs in the area provide you with students that you can engage? So that's one question. And the other thing is, I'm just thinking about, Jim, I had the opportunity to talk to you, I guess last year, because I've been interested in homeless issues for a long time. But you were talking to me, again, this may have been 2 years ago, about you've got a small community. You've got 14 people, and you've created this community. And I've learned with, after-school programs, often smaller programs are the most successful because they create communities. So I was wondering about with the larger programs like Caspar, have you ever thought about creating, if you have pretty constant guests, could you have, like at CRLS, they created schools? Could you create communities within the larger center to create more of a sense of community? Would that be something that might help?
So interns / students, hospital interns or
Yeah,
what
so
have
we
you, and
work.
then the
Yeah, we work with our agency. VACO works with a number of the universities, both in Boston and Cambridge, to provide internships with the hope that once their internship is completed, that they would want to stay with the agency. Sorry, and I don't remember the second part.
And then about in the larger program, is there a way to sort of create smaller communities within the larger community so that people don't, you know, it's not as
Yeah.
large.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great idea, and it's something to think about how we could do that. The shelter, the way they're set up, are not obviously ideal. You know, it's large, well, at least at 240, we have large dorms where we have a large number of people having to share a communal space. It would be ideal if we were able to reconfigure our physical locations to create like pods or like smaller communities. That would be wonderful. But that definitely gives me something to kind of think about how we could build something into our current shelter services.
All right, thank you. So just in the last few minutes, just a couple of things from me, and you don't necessarily have to answer these now, but just thoughts, you know, things to think about. First of all, I too want to thank everybody for being here. I know it was not the easiest meeting, either for the folks in the community to get up and share or for us to sit and hear. Everyone is working very hard and wants to do very well, and to hear that sometimes that's not going as well as we want is not easy. So I just want to acknowledge that and appreciate people's willingness to engage in this conversation. I think you know, when I heard about the trainings, and again, you don't have to answer these, there are a lot of good trainings going on. A lot of these issues that we heard today really stem from not so much around, you know, Narcan training and those kinds of things, although also important and need to be part of the training, but it's conflict resolution kind of thing, right? How do you deal when you're feeling overwhelmed and overworked and underpaid as a staff member, when you have a guest that is having an issue or having a crisis, or maybe isn't treating you, you know, with the respect that you deserve? How do you not reciprocate that by not treating them with the respect that they deserve? And so conflict resolution training and supervision around that is really important. I was really I guess the follow-up to that is, you know, thinking about what support we offer staff. You know, I certainly know that, again, as a social worker, but maybe more so as a parent, if I am not at my best, I cannot be at my best for the people that I'm in charge of taking care of, right? So, you know, what are we doing for our staff to make sure that they have a place to meet their mental health needs, to meet their, you know, because if they're on empty, they're not going to have anything to provide anybody else. And so maybe some work around or thinking about how we do that. I think a lot of the folks that spoke today understand and know the grievance procedure. They know, you know, how to file something, what they're supposed to do. I think sometimes I hear there's not a closing of the loop, and so they feel like these complaints go into a black box and there's no feedback as to what actually happened. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, but I think sometimes that loop doesn't get closed. And I understand that that's also difficult because there are issues around confidentiality. There are issues around personnel. You can't go back and say, yeah, we fired this person because, right? And so how do you close that loop to make sure people know that their concern is being addressed? I would also imagine that if staffing is an issue and it's really hard to hire people, you know, it makes it hard to let people go, right? Because you don't have anybody to fill those roles. And so, you know, what happens when you have someone who's maybe had 4, 5, 6, 7 grievances filed against them and that are legitimate? What do you do with that person when you don't necessarily have somebody who could take that person's place? I do like the idea that was brought up around some kind of advisory board. The woman who mentioned that, I saw a lot of heads nodding, you know, so that, you know, maybe having something in place where there are representatives in the shelter that if guests are having an issue, they can go to that representative who can then bring that to the staff, so that maybe you don't have, you know, 20 people going up to the staff member, but you can go and you can have a weekly meeting with a couple of the representatives on the advisory board who can say, here, this is what we're hearing, concerns that we're hearing, and they can be that feedback loop back to the other guests. You know, we've heard things, and then some of the sort of nuts and bolts things like, you know, places for people to lock up belongings, We heard that the rules are posted, and you know, I also want to speak to the consistency piece, and this is sort of a rub that, on one hand, because we're hearing both things. On one hand, we're hearing people say there needs to be consistency. We need to know what the rules are, and everyone needs to follow the rules. And then we also, in the same sentence, hear there needs to be flexibility. So that's a hard, you know, if programs need to be structured to keep people safe, but at the same time, not everyone's situation is the same. And so you want to be flexible because one person's needs are not the same as another person's needs. But when people see that, they say, oh, this person's getting treated differently than I am. But the staff can't explain to you why that person is being treated differently because that's that person's confidentiality. So there's no, this is a rub in residential schools and out of district, any place where you have folks that have a variety of needs and you have a program that is responsible for them, this is always a rub, right? You want to be consistent so people know what the rules are, but consistency can also can sometimes mean that people don't get their individual needs met because the rule is the rule. And that's just a, you know, that's a rub I think that's going to be ongoing. So I could go on. I do like the idea. I mean, what I would like to do in terms of thinking of next steps, we heard from a lot of people saying, geez, we were here 10 years ago having this conversation. I do want to say a couple things that, you know, it's not an either or. It's not either the city is doing great and everything's perfect or everything is crap, right? That's not the reality. The reality is the city of Cambridge is doing more for the unhoused population in our city in terms of funding and staffing proportionally than any other city in the Commonwealth. I don't even know if Boston used $18 million in ARPA funds to support the homeless, right? That does not mean we're perfect. That does not mean there aren't conflicts. This is complex and complicated, but we're not in the same place we were 10 years ago. When I joined the council 10 years ago, the council was barely talking about homelessness. We are now spending millions, tens of millions of dollars to address housing, prevention, intervention, you know, shelter space. So, but there is no city in the country that has solved this problem, right? But again, it does not mean that we're minimizing these concerns or that we can't do better. We can and we must. But to say that the city is not doing anything or hasn't moved is simply not true and not helpful. And so I'll go to Councilor Wilson in a second. So I just think, you know, we need to, you know, bring maybe the shelter providers together more often, maybe not necessarily in a formal meeting like this, but maybe the mayor will let me use the parlor and we can have a group to get together and talk and be more connected to figure out how we're going to move this forward. But I'm confident that we will. And I'm very hopeful that we will, and I hope people took the feedback today very seriously. I believe that they did. So, Charity, we've got about one more minute. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, sorry. I was just going to comment on I appreciate all the things that were just said. I feel like the training issue is one that we struggle with sometimes because I think you can train people all day, but if people aren't values aligned, and don't really want to be are doing it just as a job, which I mean is a very real thing. I'm not critiquing people who are doing things to earn money, but I think there's something about being values aligned in this line of work that feels really important. And I think we are always striving to hire people who are really in it for the right reasons. And I just offer that as, we can offer all the training we want, but if the people we hire aren't really invested in the mission of our organizations, it's going to be hard to achieve the things that we're hoping to achieve.
Thank you, Councilor Wilson.
Thank you. And I, again, just want to share my gratitude to all of you all for sharing and being here. And also just one thing that we haven't been able to really talk about is activities around crime that are happening in our community with unhoused populations as well, overdoses, things that are happening in our spaces. And, folks had testified in public comment around that. So really thinking about how we are servicing folks who are in need or folks who are going through any type of crisis in the moment. What does that actually look like? and maybe even getting a report back to us, like how often is this happening at certain locations, so that we can help with offering some services, or just thinking about what services are actually needed outside of maybe Narcan and other things like that. But definitely wanting to think about and address the issue around like the corner of Green Street and Magazine, and the different things that are happening at bus stops. And of course, as co-chair of the public safety, those are conversations that we're having ongoing as well in that respect. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we are over time. I'm sure the clerk is wringing her hands that I didn't extend the time for the last 5 minutes, but sorry about that. So on a motion by Councilor Wilson to adjourn, roll call.
Vice Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
Councilor Nolan is absent. Councilor Stuckey.
Yes.
Councilor Sabrina Wheeler.
Yes.
Councilor Wilson.
Yes.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.